Mossdale Cave Incident. It was June 24, 1967, and 10 cavers were about to enter Mossdale Cavern to help clear some of the deeper passages and map them out. The two leaders of the group had already explored this cave before, which reassured everyone else. This particular cavern was known for its tight spaces and the very few areas where a person could fully stand. After a few hours inside, 4 of the cavers realized how difficult the cave actually was and decided to return to the surface. They noticed a cloudy sky, but nothing seemed out of the ordinary. The remaining cavers continued their descent until they reached the far marathon passage, which measured only 18 in x 12 in with a small stream of water flowing along the bottom. Everything seemed to be going well, and the group on the surface soon noticed that it had started raining, so they took cover. Initially, the rain did not seem concerning, but the cavers inside began to notice rising water levels. When the water became alarmingly high, they decided to end the day's work and head back, even though they were still 3 hours from the entrance. Meanwhile, the surface group spotted something terrifying. A lake of water had formed around the cave's entrance. The cavers inside had no idea how much water was about to flood the cave. The surface group ran to get help while the cavers frantically tried to reach higher chambers. However, the water continued to rise, pressing toward their faces. Rescuers and hundreds of volunteers worked tirelessly pumping water out of the cave and pumping oxygen inside, hoping that the cavers had found a safe chamber. Unfortunately, every one of the cavers drowned. Gollum's Cave. It's August 18, 2005, and a group of 5 friends decided to venture into the Gollum Cave, also called the Cave of Death, because of how dangerous it was. They reached the entrance at 3 a.m. and one of the friends decided to wait for the others outside. They encountered their first problem when actually trying to get in, as they had to crawl through a small pool of water. After that, there was a fork going left and right, and they chose left, which led them to another small pool of water. This seemingly innocent pool, however, actually led to another section of the cave through an underwater tunnel. The tunnel itself was really small, just 3 to 4 feet in diameter, and to get through it, you had to be completely submerged. This meant only one person at a time could go in, and they had to swim about 15 feet. One by one, they started plunging into the pool of water to reach the other side of the cave. And once they made it, they discovered a section with about 3 feet of airspace. From the perspective of the friend who stayed outside, there was no sound or light coming from inside the cave, and after a while, he started to get worried. He went into the cave himself, but heard noises and saw no lights. Not sure what to do, he first called some friends who had experience with caving, and then called the police. He couldn't have imagined what was happening inside. The 4 friends who went in probably realized that the 3 feet of airspace they'd reached had bad air, which is a term cavers use for air that doesn't have the normal balance of gases, meaning there's more carbon dioxide and less oxygen. This reduces your ability to think, move, and breathe properly, making the return swim through that narrow tunnel super risky. They tried to get back out one at a time, but the first person who went underwater was unable to find the exit hole before running out of breath. That happened because the increased carbon dioxide messed with her ability to hold her breath and think clearly. After 30 to 60 seconds, the second person went in and found the first one, and so on until all of them got stuck in the tunnel. The police arrived and tried to pump in oxygen and pump out water while family and friends waited anxiously outside the cave. Unfortunately, it was all in vain. The bodies were later recovered and the cave was eventually closed off with cement. Floyd Collins Incident. In late December 1924, Floyd Collins discovered a cave called Sand Cave, which was easily accessible to tourists because it was near a highway. He quickly struck a deal with the land's owners to receive 50% of any profits from the cave's exploration. Afterward, he immediately began working there. Since there was no significant entrance, however, many tourists avoided it. As a result, Floyd spent hours every day over the next few weeks digging deeper and deeper. On January 30, 1925, it was snowing outside. And once again, Floyd went into the cave only to find something shocking. Crawling forward with a lantern, he reached what was known as the turnaround room, called that way because many cavers would stop there and turn around, deeming it too risky to continue. The only way to go farther was through a tiny narrow hole called the squeeze, which measured only 9 in height. Floyd, however, managed to push through. Beyond the squeeze, he saw a narrow pit dropping about 10 feet. He went down feet first and reached the bottom where he found yet another pit. Squatting down, he removed the remaining rocks and debris and finally saw an opening into the main cave. He tied a rope in place and descended an 80-foot drop. Reaching the cavern floor, he was amazed by the sight, but noticed his light was starting to dim. Wanting to avoid being left in the dark, he climbed back up the 80-foot drop and began returning, moving backwards and pushing his lantern with his shoulder. Unfortunately, his lantern slipped into a tiny hole and shattered, leaving him in total darkness. Because the cavern was extremely unstable, Floyd knew he had to move carefully to avoid dislodging loose rocks. Unable to see, however, he kicked one loose and it fell onto his left leg, trapping him. He tried freeing himself with his right leg, but the more he moved, the more rocks tumbled down, further wedging him in place. It was 10 a.m., and he began shouting for help, hoping someone would hear him. He remained there all day, and by 9 a.m. the next morning, nearly 24 hours after he had become trapped, two of the cave's owners arrived with their 17-year-old son, Jewel Estes, to check on him. They saw Floyd's coat hanging outside the cave and called his name, but no one answered. So, they ventured deeper. Before long, the two owners turned back because the passages were too tight. But Jewel continued and eventually found Floyd, who asked him to call his brothers for help. Soon, Marshall Collins, Floyd's brother, and Lee Collins, Floyd's father, reached the entrance, finding a growing crowd watching the rescue attempt. Marshall and another man went inside to widen the passage, digging carefully so as not to send loose rocks tumbling onto Floyd. At 4:00 p.m., Floyd's other brother, Homer, arrived. Floyd had previously asked Homer to come along that day, so Homer felt guilty for refusing and did his best to help. He did reach Floyd, but a new problem emerged. The crowds outside had started multiple bonfires. The melting ice funneled water into the cave, creating mud and sending freezing cold water down toward Floyd. After 8 hours with Floyd, his brothers had to rest. Upon emerging, Homer grew furious at the huge crowd, telling people to leave if they couldn't help. However, none of them listened. Reporters began arriving, hoping to interview Homer. Tired of the questions, he told them to see for themselves inside the cave. Confusion and rumors spread. Some claimed Floyd was already dead or that the cave had collapsed entirely. Determined to prove otherwise, Marshall offered a $500,000 reward to anyone who saved his brother. As rumors spread more, however, he went in to check on Floyd himself and found him alive. Floyd managed to free one hand, suggesting they tie a rope around his chest to pull him out. But as soon as they tried, he begged them to stop, saying he felt like he was being pulled in two. Homer worked continuously, removing dirt and debris until he was utterly exhausted and needed medical attention. By Tuesday night, 95 hours after Floyd had become trapped, a reporter named Skez entered the cave and installed a light bulb near Floyd. While removing rubble, Skez exposed more of Floyd's legs, but still couldn't free him. His story and interview with Floyd were published, drawing even larger crowds. Hotels nearby were filled, and at least 1,000 people gathered around Sand Cave. All this activity further weakened the cave walls, putting it at risk of collapse, though nobody realized it at the time, as everyone was rooting for Floyd. At hour 123, the entrance to the pit collapsed, blocking any access to Floyd and cutting off deliveries of food and water. By hour 144, a team of workers formed to dig a new tunnel to reach him. The only way they could know if Floyd was still alive was the light bulb SKS had installed. It was connected to another bulb outside, which would flicker when Floyd breathed. They dug relentlessly, but with no food or water reaching Floyd, combined with the cold temperature, his chances were fading quickly. By Friday, February 13th, the men had nearly reached him, and one worker reported hearing groaning about 10 feet away. However, at 1:30 a.m. on February 16th, a worker reached Floyd and found him already deceased. Initially, Floyd's body was left in the cave. After some time, though, his brother Homer arranged for its removal and gave him a proper burial.